Hey everyone, and welcome to the tutorial for the Procedural City Generator 1.1 update. This is a really big update that's been a long time coming, with some of the biggest features being finally support for landscapes and water actors, as well as a lot of improvements and just quality of life changes. So in this video, we're going to hit some of the major features that have been added to the update. I'm not going to cover everything, but just the main things that we've added here. And I am assuming that you already looked at the regular quick start guide because I won't be spending a lot of time explaining every little option. This is specifically for the 1.1 update. And here it is what we're going to cover today. We're going to take a look at the tutorial level, which you should have when you update PCG. There's going to be a level that's going to be preset with a little things, including a new landscape and some water. We're going to be looking at all of the different changes to the city zones. So you can see that there's a lot of different things there. We're going to be generating our roads and then looking at some of the new options there to make sure that they conform to the landscape. Then we'll be spawning our buildings and again looking at some of the new options there. And finally, and very briefly, we're going to be spawning foliage and looking at the new options for slope and physical material. And then towards the end is a bit of a bonus. We'll take a look at how we're actually adding some of the road names. And there's a data table for that. You'll see how the buildings have unique addresses, because now that we have addresses and road names, then we can do that. We'll look at how we can change which landscape layer each building applies on its foundation. We'll look at how we can enable or disable spawning interiors. And finally, just for fun, I've added a pier and some boat blueprints so we can do a little pier at the end. So without further ado, let's go ahead and open Unreal Engine. And the first thing you want to do is make sure you update the Procedural City Generator from the launcher. And when you finally first open the project, let's just quickly verify. Click on Settings, Project Settings. You want to make sure that the version you have here is 1.1. You'll see it on the icon here and you'll see it on the project version. Then you want to go to Procedural City Maps and go ahead and open level tutorial _11. That's for the 1.1 update. That's the one I have open here. And you should see exactly what I'm seeing here. This is a very small little island, which I have set up for a tutorial today. And you can see here that if I select the landscape here, I'm going to go to the landscape tab here. If I go to the paint layer, you see that the material has been updated from the previous version to this version. It is still a procedural material with a foliage removal layer, but I've added a soil, asphalt, and sand layers that you can paint as well. And that is because it just showcases what PCG can do better, obviously. So you can see here that we have the procedural material, and then I created here what is supposed to be a little beach area here with some sand. And then we have a little mountain here, and there's some snow at the top. The next thing is obviously the water. So you can see that we have what is supposed to be the ocean here, and then we have a little lake here. And for the water, if I'm going to go back to the slide here, we want to make sure that we add for all of the water actors that we have in the world, we want to make sure that we add a component called PCGWaterSettings. That is a brand new component that I've added. So you see here that by selecting the ocean, if I go down here to the details panel, I've already added the component that is necessary on the version that comes with PCG. But if you have another asset that you're using for water, which you might as well be using, make sure that you click on Add Components, PCG Water, and you'll have the component right here. And all this component does is, when you select it, you'll have some settings under Setup. If you expand it, all you'll see is options for the different types of roads that are allowed to cross this body of water. And also you'll have a minimum water offset, which by default is 1,000 units. So what that means is if PCG is trying to generate rows and it hits this water body here, which is in this case the ocean, it'll verify if there's any kind of road that is allowed to cross. In this case, we don't want any roads on the ocean. So if for some reason the road gets to the ocean, it'll just stop and nothing will be generated there. And we're going to see the same options here if I select our little lake and click on PCGWaterSettings. We see that nothing is allowed. Now, if I leave this like this, when I'm generating my roads, you'll see that no roads will actually cross this lake. But in this case, I want to do something a little different. I want to allow minor roads to cross the lake. And you'll see why in a second. It's because I'm also including auto bridges on our roads. So we want to go ahead and just allow the minor roads. No main roads and no side roads, just minor roads. They go there. All right. And the minimum water offset is 1,000 units. This is the height of the road. Think about it as a bridge. We don't want the road to be exactly at the level of the water. We want the road to be at a specific offset from the water mesh. So if you think 1,000 is too little or too much, you can go ahead and change that. And then PCG will respect that amount as it is generating the roads. All right, so now that we've done that, let's go ahead and open the UI. So go back to Procedural City, Blueprints, Interface, and PCG Main. Remember, we want to right-click and run the editor widget. And automatically, you'll see that we have this spawned. If for some reason you don't see the current city and current landscape selected, right here, the name, this is actually a button. You can just click here, see how it kind of sinks in, and it will automatically load the current city. And actually, if you have more than one city, you'll see that there's a drop down here. You'll see all of the different cities in this map. Same with the landscape. If you don't see the landscape automatically loaded, click on current landscape. Again, this is a button, and you'll see all of the landscapes here. If you're using more than one landscape in your level, make sure that you always have the correct landscape for your city. This is going to be the landscape that is passed to the roads and buildings so they can flatten it and terraform it. So make sure that you have the correct things there. I already added some road connectors here, and I've already added some zones. And again, this is just to speed up the video. So if we go to the zones, a couple of things that I'll mention. This is very similar to the way we had it before. Two things I've added is I've added a zone called no roads and a zone called no buildings. That is exactly what it sounds like. So if we add a zone that says no roads, you can put it anywhere and no roads will be generated when that zone is detected. Same thing with no buildings. If you want roads in a specific place but no buildings, then of course you add the no buildings zone. And again, if we go back here, open the PCG folder on your world outliner, and you're going to see if you scroll down to zones that I already have a few zones. So let's go ahead and select all of our zones here and go down to setup, marker visible. Let's go ahead and enable that. And again, you'll see that I already have this pre-set up for the tutorial. We have in the middle a commercial zone. Then all the way in the back here, we have a rural zone. Then we have a residential. And finally, this big red one here is a no roads zone. So we want the city to generate everywhere inside the bounds, except we don't want any roads to generate here. Okay. So if we go back here, we already talked about the new types. Each zone has some new settings that we're going to go over. There's going to be the road generation, the landscape options, and then finally the building stuff. So if we go back to Unreal, let's just go ahead and select one zone. In this case, we're going to go ahead and select the commercial zone. And if you scroll down, not on setup, but under setup spawn, you'll see that we have a few additional options here. We have road generation presets. If we go ahead and expand that, you'll notice that we have specific presets per zone, and that's is new for the update. And this is going to mimic the exact same settings that we have, if you go under roads, advanced settings, notice that we have generation presets here. So this is how curvy the roads will be. So we have highway, main, minor, and side. These are all of the global settings. If you don't do anything at all, PCG will use these global settings. But if you go down here and click on Use Zone Road Generation Settings, then PCG will use the generation settings for that specific zone. So let's go ahead and do that now. And we're going to go ahead and click on Use Zone Road Generation Settings. And now all of the roads inside this zone will use the preset grid-like. Okay? And if we go to, let's go to now the residential zone. Let's do the same thing, road generation settings. Let's go ahead and enable this. But instead of using grid-like, let's use for main road, let's use default. So it's a little curvy. And then for minor and side, let's use mild curves. So it's a little bit different. And if we go to the rural zone, let's do something similar. Click on Use Road Generation Settings. But then for the main road, let's do mild curves. And for the minor and side roads, let's use heavy curves. So essentially, we're saying that if you're in the commercial zone, everything should be grid-like. But if you're in the residential, it's a little bit more curvy. And if you're in the rural, it's a little bit more curvy than that. Then we have the road landscape options. And again, now that we have landscapes, we're going to be looking at slopes. So you'll see that we have some generic options here. Again, global. We are saying that the max slope in degrees that these roads can spawn on, in this case, are going to be 20, 20, 25, and 25. You'll see that the same settings are going to be applied here. Now, if you wanted to make changes, you can also enable the settings here. So let's go ahead and do that and say, hey, for the commercial zone, I want the commercial zone to be fairly flat. Usually the commercial zones are more flat. So for the highways and main roads, let's just leave it as that, up to 20 degrees. And then the minor and sides, 25 degrees. If we go to residential and we go to the presets here, we can see that we have 20, 20. That's just the default. We can change that if we want to. Let's go ahead and make that a little bit different. Let's do 30 and 30 here. And by the way, you can put whatever you want. These are degrees. So let's just keep this, give it a little bit more flexibility here. And if we go to the rural, notice that everything in rural is 30 by default. Let's go ahead and just enable that. And let's leave everything at 30. Essentially what we're doing is we're saying how hilly we want our zones to be. Now we're not going to be creating mountains or anything like that. We're going to be carving the landscape. But if you have an area that's very mountainous, it'll flatten it more if you go to, for example, the commercial zone here. And finally, you notice that we also have building landscape options here for all of the zones. And if you open the options here, you have options to change some of the things here on a per zone basis. So we're going to have something called the building max and min offsets. And by default, they're going to be 100 units. And that is basically the Z offset of buildings that are next to roads. So typically you wouldn't have a road, let's say at level 0, and a building that's next to the road super high on a mountain with a really, really steep slope to get to the building. Usually buildings are going to be very close in level to the roads. So by default, we're saying that the buildings have to be between 100 and -100 of the whatever height that road is. That is going to make it a lot smoother when we're actually placing the buildings in the landscape. This is, again, if we go to buildings here, we're kind of going ahead of ourselves. The min and max global offsets that we have here for the buildings. Actually, the global one is 200, so min and max. So it can be a little bit higher than lower. But here on the landscape options for the zone, we see that we have different options here. If you don't do anything, we're going to go ahead and use the global settings. If you enable this, then it'll override the settings and will use these values as well. You also have a max slope to spawn, and you can use again the zone. You can just click here and override it. That is a very steep slope. So you want your buildings to be spawning on very hilly terrain, and just cut the terrain. You can change the spawn here, the slope here. And finally, we're also looking at materials. So these are going to be physical materials that are on the landscape. And if you want to have a list of physical materials to avoid, you can add the materials here and click on Use Zone Physical Materials. This is on a per zone basis, but if you don't select anything here, the buildings will use their specific options per building. So again, if I go here, let's just select the commercial zone here, for example. If we go and open the building details here, see that we have a bunch of different buildings. Go ahead and expand the first one. This is going to be one of the apartments, apartment 1A. If you go all the way down, notice that we have a section called landscape options. If I open this up, you're going to see the same exact settings that you see before. So you can set these settings on a per building basis, on a per zone basis, or on a global basis. So you can see here. So on this specific building, you could use, you could change the offset here. There's the slope, the max slope to spawn. And if you have any physical materials to avoid, this is where you would add it. So let's say that you have a bunch of sand in the terrain. You could come here and just click on plus, click on the list here, and look at all of the physical materials that are included. And in this case, we have asphalt, sand, and soil, which correspond to the layers in the landscape. If you have something way more elaborate than I do, you may have 10, 15 layers in your landscape. If you're using something super complex, you can select any of those physical materials and add them here on a per building basis. Now, we're not going to do physical materials for the demo here, but if you have something and you want to follow along, here's how you would add it. Let's just click on save real quick. All right, and now let's go back to our slides here and notice that we've covered pretty much everything. Road generation settings, this is how curvy the roads will be. Landscape settings, how the roads will affect and contour to the landscape. Building landscape settings, there's going to be on a per zone basis, and then specifically on the building details, you also have the same landscape options. Go ahead and play around with those until you get something that you like. Now let's go ahead and look at generating the actual roads. So just so we can see, we're going to go ahead and select all of our zones. Go down to spawn and click on, on setup and click on marker visible. Deselect that. That way we can actually see what's going on. Click on roads, and then you're going to go to the general settings. And there's some additional options now that we have landscapes. The first one here, which is ticked, is called detect self collision. So if you have roads that are going to be very curvy, so you're using something like heavy curves or organic, you have the option to detect whether the road does self collision or not. If everything in your city is grid-like, you can deselect this and speed up the generation a little bit. You also have search for water, and that is enabled by default. If your level doesn't have any water at all, go ahead and deselect this, because again, every single option here is an additional trace, and it's gonna slow down the generation just a little bit. And the same thing for materials. In this case, we won't do anything, but if you wanted to avoid specific physical materials for your roads, this is where you would click on search for materials, and then the roads could have an additional trace for specific materials. If you go to the advanced settings here, you'll notice that we have an option to select a physical material per road type. So physical material here. You can see that you can select it here, but honestly the best option would be to do it on the zone. There is no easy way for me to add an array to a widget like this. So if you only have one physical material, you can just add it here. Otherwise, what I would suggest is go to your commercial zone or whichever zone, go to your road landscape options. Physical material list here, and you can add it. There's another option, and it is if you have something global, you can click on the road manager here. This is the actual blueprint that generates the roads. And you'll see that we have a physical material settings here with a list for the different types of roads. So this would be the easiest way to add multiple physical materials for your roads. You just go here in Road Manager, go to Physical Material Settings, and just add them for the road type that you want. So instead of having one here only, you can go ahead and add as many as you want for the road type. All right, so let's go ahead and just generate our connecting roads, generate our main roads. And before I continue, notice that if you just kind of zoom out here, notice that it looks kind of like a mess, like everything's overlapping. And the reason for that is because I am not modifying the landscape yet. That is an additional step. We want to make sure that we're happy with our road network before we modify the landscape. That way we don't have to keep going back and forth. So if you wanted to see how the roads actually look like, you could just select your landscape and hide it for a second. And when I hide the landscape, you can see that the roads are actually connecting correctly. It's just that they're overlapping the landscape and it's a little bit harder to see. If you have a bunch of stuff and it's harder for you to select the landscape for whatever reason, you can click on the little S here next to your landscape for select, and it'll automatically select the landscape for you in the outliner, and then you can hide it and show it like this. It's just a little bit of convenience that I've added there in case this is useful for you. Keep in mind that if your landscape is hidden, I won't be able to select it. That is, again, a limitation with the editor scripting. There's not much I can do as far as I can tell. All right, so we have our main roads. Let's go ahead and generate our minor roads. Done. And generate our side roads. And we're done. Notice here that we do have a road that went through the lake, and it is exactly what we would expect. It is a minor road because we selected that option here. No other roads are there. And again, if I hide, you'll see that we have our roads generated as we would expect. All right, so really quickly, I'm not going to spend too much time here, but this will be the time for you to look at the roads and see if there's anything that you wanted to modify, anything at all that looks kind of odd that you wanted to change. This would be the time. Like in this case, look at this is something that you might want to change. Look at the curve here. So maybe I'll just grab this and put it up a little bit higher, for example. Again, not going to spend too much time here, but this is just an example of, you know, what you want, what you would like to do. If you wanted to make any adjustments, this would be the time to do it. Or you can just delete the spline point here and have them connected. Same here. I'm gonna go ahead and just delete the spline point and move this guy back. There you go. Just to keep things going pretty quickly on the video. Go ahead and make the adjustments. Like in this case, I'll just go ahead and remove this road. No need to have that there. And when you're happy, you're like, okay, great. I like my roads. Let's go ahead and leave it at that, including the road here. Notice that we have search for water because we want our roads to make sure that they're looking for water. So if you select any of the roads, you'll see that there's an option called detect water already pre-selected here. That's important because when we change out of the construction mode to the regular final mesh, you'll see that we're going to have an automatic bridge generated there. All right, so let's see. We looked at the options here and we generated our roads. Let's go ahead and look at how we can add a manual road to our city. This is really neat. You could do that before, but I've made it a lot easier for us to do that. So let's say that we wanted to add a road here. Let's just go ahead and add a road here. The easiest way would be to just drag one of the roads from the content browser to the level. So go to Blueprints, Roads, and here are all of the different roads. And let's just add a minor road. Drag it to the level, extend it, and I'm going to rotate it. I'm just going to connect it to the road here. And again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time making it perfect simply because of time constraints, but it's just a matter of showing that we can do this. So grab your road, give it whatever shape you want. And actually, that's not a good example. Let's go ahead and delete this because we are outside of the bounds of the city. So we'll go ahead and move that a little bit more here. Yep, there you go. So we just added that road. And all we need to do if we want to add this road to the city is we want to select it and go right here and click on Manual Roads. That's a new tab. And it's super simple. All we have is just one button called Add Selected Roads to the City. So make sure you select all of the new roads that you've added manually and click on Add. And it says Selected Roads added to Islandville, which is the name of the city. That's it. That is as simple as it's going to get. So you can do all of your procedural road generation first. Then you can drag the roads from the content browser, connect them, make whatever shape you want, select them all, click on Add Selected Roads to City, and that's it. That is all you need to do. All right, now we're going to go into the different options, into creating intersections, adjusting the points, and flattening the points. So now we want to go here and we're going to do this for all of the different roads. So click on Main Roads, create intersections, and click on Apply. You'll see that automatically all of the main roads are selected and you're going to be creating the intersections when the roads connect. We'll do the same thing for minor roads. And we'll do the same thing for side roads. Then after that, we can leave it on side roads, go down and click on Adjust Points. This is going to do one more round of adjustments and it's going to try to take out if there are any points that are too close together or any overlapping points. This is going to try to do a final adjustment on all of the points just to minimize the amount of manual work that you'll have to do. And finally, we want to flatten the points. The intersections should be flat. So we'll try to do that now and click on Apply Action. For the main roads, then for the minor roads, we'll flatten the points. And for the side roads, we'll flatten the points. So make sure the first three actions, create intersections, adjust points, and flatten points, you're doing for all of your different types of roads. All right, and now that we've done that, now we want to make sure that we flatten the terrain. So I'll go ahead and click on Save real quick before we do that. And just a second, as soon as it saves, we can go to the next step. It's taking a little bit here. Oh, actually, before we do that, we want to make sure that we spawn our cul-de-sacs. If there are any cul-de-sacs, we want to make sure that we spawn them. And now we want to select our cul-de-sacs and we want to align the terrain and apply the materials. Go ahead and click Action. No cul-de-sacs in this example, so nothing's going to happen. Then go ahead and select the roundabouts. Gonna be like in this case, this guy here, and click Align Terrain and Apply Mats. Apply Action. And notice what happened here. I am actually creating a spline that is perfectly round around the roundabout and applying the material. You can see here that we have some dirt. And that just happened here. We are flattening the terrain for the roundabouts first. We want to make sure that we do that. And then we're going to do the same thing for our roads. So main roads, click on Apply. Minor roads, click on Apply. And side roads, click on Apply. Now if you just go down here, you'll notice something a little weird, and that is the grass has not been updated, and that is just a quirk of Unreal. So you can go ahead and click on the landscape, go down to the material, and we're going to click on landscape material, click on the little icon here, open the actual material, and you can just make a small change, just literally toggle blend smoothness on and off, save, and it'll update the material so you can see taking out all of the grass. And as you can see here, it's not perfect. We're going to have to make some adjustments. But thankfully, a lot of this overlap will go away once you change from the construction mode to the final mesh. Notice how it's a lot smoother. And that is because the construction mode doesn't have as many segments, spline points here and segments. So it's not going to be as smooth. So don't worry too much about these overlaps. We can worry about that a little bit later. We'll leave it like that for now. This is the time to make some manual adjustments. Like in this case, you probably want to flatten this area here, so you can go back to the modes and go back to, for example, sculpt and smooth the area. And actually, instead of that, I'm just going to flatten the area. You can see that we're kind of flattening it here. So not going to spend too much time here, but you will still need to do some manual adjustments when it comes to obviously the roads. Like in this case, again, there are some things that are pretty obvious. Like let's just go ahead and flatten this out here for the roads. If you see anything like that, you can go ahead and adjust it here. Like in this case, I'm going to make it smaller and just kind of open it up here. And that's pretty much where there's going to be still a little bit more manual work. All right. And here as well. Just one last time. Oops. I'm going to flatten it like this. You can see it right there. All right. So we've gone ahead and done all of that for the roads. Now let's go ahead and do the building spawning. So keep in mind, you can do a lot more adjustments here. I'm not going to spend a lot of time, but go ahead and align the terrain, flatten the terrain, modify the terrain in any way you want here. Make sure that it's looking as you want it before we move on to the buildings. Now click on buildings and you'll see that we have, again, some similar prompts. We have some options here again. Search for water, search for materials. In this case, we do have water in the levels, so go ahead and select search for water. We don't want any buildings obviously spawning in the water. We're not going to be concerned with the materials, so do not select this here. And then we have a new option here called spawn interiors. By default, that is on. That means when the building is spawned, the interiors will be spawned with the building. If for some reason you just don't want any interiors on spawn time, you can just deselect this and you can add them later. So right now, notice that we are going to be spawning the buildings, and in this case, we are automatically, as we spawn the buildings, we will be flattening the terrain and applying the material as we spawn the buildings. If you don't want to do that, you have to deselect these options here, and then you have to do an additional step here. In this case, we won't do that. leave them as they are. And we're going to first spawn the cul-de-sac buildings. If there are any, we don't have any cul-de-sacs, so we don't have that option here. And then we're going to go ahead and spawn our road buildings and click on spawn rows. And now, obviously, this is the part that takes the longest. PCG is going to go through all of the different roads and zones, and it's going to now spawn the buildings. Now, every single building that spawns is going to flatten the terrain around its base, and is going to apply a material layer that is selected for that building. So let's just see how long this takes. I don't want to take too long. Or you can just fast forward the video if you don't want to wait, but I'm going to just click on spawn road buildings, and you can see that we are doing it in batches. It is a little bit slower because, again, we are modifying the landscape. So I'm going to go ahead and click spawn roads, and if you want, you can go ahead and skip a little bit more towards the end of the generation, so you don't have to wait here. We're almost done. This is one of the reasons why I made the city fairly small for the example. No point making a mega city when all we want to do is just showcase the features, right? And there you go. We're done. So now you can see that we have our city spawned. In this case, notice that we have a police station right here, covering some of the lake. This is, again, one of the limitations of the way I'm doing the trace. The trace is a line trace. In this case, it did not detect the water in this location when it did it, and then it just flattened the terrain. So this is one of the things that we'll have to kind of deal with, at least for this update. If you want to leave it like that, you can, right? It just modifies the landscape. If not, you can obviously remove this and just kind of adjust it here. All right. So first thing we'll do here is, now that we spawned our buildings, we want to make sure that we redo the roads. Notice that we have, again, the same issue with the grass. We're not going to concern ourselves with that. We can do another pass for the roads, because as the buildings are flattening the terrain, some of that may spill over to the roads. So what you want to do is, again, same thing. You might want to go back to the roads and just click on apply, align terrain, and apply mats. And then you want to do that for the main roads, apply, align landscape, and apply the materials. And now you see that the roads are once again the ones that are modifying the landscape the most. After that, we want to go back to our buildings, and now we can go ahead and select individual buildings. In this case, for the commercial, click on actually select, and all of the commercial buildings will be selected. And now we want to click on set mailbox, apply action. If there are any mailboxes, then they will be moved to the side of the road. And then we want to go to set driveway and apply action. And you can see that the driveways are these spline points that you see here that are going to be going from the front of the building all the way to the road. Okay, we're going to do the same thing for residential. Select all of the residential houses here. And we're going to do the same thing. Set mailbox. Notice how the mailbox has now been set. And set the driveway. And now the driveway has been set. Now notice that oops, make this a little. Notice that the spline has been updated, but the mesh has not. And again, that is just a quirk of the editor. What you need to do is, when all of this is selected, go down to the details panel, all the way down to driveway options here. And you'll see a toggle says use driveway. Go ahead and turn that off. and on. And when you do that, notice that now the mesh has now been updated to be next to the road. And we'll do the same thing for rural. They're going to be all the way there. We don't really even need to see it. Set mailbox. Set driveway. Same thing with all of these selected. Go to driveway options. Deselect use driveway. Select it again. And all of the splines are going to be updated. Notice that we are selecting buildings by type. However, there's a problem. We didn't do that for the commercial buildings. Notice that if we select all of the commercial buildings, we don't have that option here. And the reason for that is because we have different blueprints. Not only do we have the apartments, but we also have parking lots and we have a bunch of other stuff. So you will only get consistent options here if all of the blueprints selected are the same. So I added an additional option where you can enter a specific tag here, and instead of using the drop down, you can use any tag you want. So if I click on this specific building here, which is an apartment, and I search for tags, notice that all of my buildings have PCG building, the name, etc. But in this case, I've added PCG apartment to all of the apartments that come with PCG. So if I enter the same tag here and I select the buildings, now instead of commercial, I'm going to be using a tag. Notice that now all of the apartments are selected, and now I have the same options as before. So that's a way for allowing you to select any kind of building based on tags. So now we're going to do the same thing. We're going to go to driveway, deselect use driveway. It's going to take a little bit because there's a lot of buildings that are going to be selected, and go ahead and enable that again. And now you'll see that the mesh is going to actually be updated. So when you're adding your own custom buildings, feel free to add as many custom tags to the buildings as you want. These are going to be actor tags, and that's going to help you select all of the different kinds of buildings by tag just by using the option here. So for example, if I say PCG parking and I select, notice that we're only selecting the parking lots. As you can see here, only the parking lots are selected. And the parking lots themselves also have an option like this. So we're going to do the same thing for the parking lot. Deselect use driveway, select use driveway, and now you notice that they are doing the same thing. And finally, I did police station. So PCG police station, select, and now we have all of the different police stations selected. You can see here, and we're going to do the same thing. We're going to go and do use driveway on and off, and that should clear up the driveway. All right, and finally, let's go ahead and go back and open the material for the landscape and just select and deselect something just to force the update here. And now if we go back to, for example, this zone here, notice that now the roads are clear, and then we have an actual driveway here. And if I look really closely, we see that the mailbox has an actual address, 8 Pearl Street. If we click on the street here, this road right here, this road is actually Pearl Street. So there's an actual full address per home that is automatically added to the mailbox. Every road in PCG has a street address, a name, and then because of that, I can actually add the full address to the house here. All right, so let's go back to the roads, and now we're going to select all of the main roads and deselect construction mode. That way we're going to see kind of the final mesh. Select minor roads, deselect construction mode, and side roads, deselect construction mode, and then we have the roads here. Notice now that when we deselected the construction mode, this minor road automatically added a bridge mesh. Every road that comes with PCG has an automatic bridge mesh. So main roads have their own mesh, even highways, I've added a mesh. So if you wanted to have a highway connecting two cities go through a big lake, you can automatically have a mesh for a bridge. Obviously, in this case, you probably wouldn't want this house here. So this is one of those areas where you want a manual change, right? You'll probably delete this house here. You don't want this house so close to the bridge. But the point is that you have now auto bridges that go over the water, right? And now let's go back to our slide. We looked at how to add mailboxes, how to set driveways, how to set the options for the water and materials. And finally, let's go ahead and show the foliage. This is super simple. We're not gonna spend too much time. Let's go ahead and spawn our fixed props and reset the batch. Spawn our random props. Then let's go to foliage and let's go ahead and spawn our city foliage. You can see that we're now spawning our foliage. And let us add a make this a little bit faster, a area spawner for foliage. So spawn area spawner, you're gonna have it right here. And actually I'm gonna click on G for game mode, and let's make this really big to grab the entire city. So like, I don't know, 2000 by 2000. And let's make it even bigger. Let's do like 3000. Yeah, but like 2500. The reason and actually 2500 is more than enough. The reason I'm doing that is because I want to show the material. So right now, if I just start spawning the foliage, it'll spawn everywhere. But now we want to, with the foliage selected, we want to go down here to the foliage list. In this case, we only have one, which is this pine. You go down here, you'll see the same options that you've seen before, including random yaw, but now you have a max slope to spawn. And that is going to be, in this case, a 20-degree slope. You can change the slope here. We're going to leave it on the default, and we're going to have some physical materials to avoid. We don't want it to spawn in the sand. So click on the plus sign, add sand, and you'll see that even though the spawner is covering the sandy area, no tree should spawn on the sand. And now go ahead and spawn area foliage. We'll do it a few times here. Notice that no trees are spawning on the sand. They can get real close here. That's a limitation of the trays, but no trees are spawning right here on the sand. Oops, and I just see a small bug here that should be fixed by the time you guys see this video. The foliage is hitting the no roads zone that you can see here, so that's something that I'll make sure to fix. But by and large, you see that the foliage respects the slope. You see some trees up here, but no trees by the side of the mountain. All right, those are the pretty much the main features. There's some additional things that I wanted to cover really quickly. The road names. Where are the road names? They are in a data table called road names, funny enough. So if you ever wanted to know how am I adding the road names and can you add your own names, absolutely you can. So click on Procedural City, Blueprints, core data tables, and you'll see DT underscore road names. And when you open this data table, you'll see that all we have is the road type and then a name. And I just grabbed this from a website that had a bunch of common names, and you can see that we have a bunch for major, main, minor, and side roads. So, and then highways. So highway would be like I-38, 39, I-40. This is obviously based here on the US, but you can change the names here, add your own names, and because of this format, type and name, you can even import from a CSV file, and you can add as many names as you want. That way, the road names in your project can match whichever kind of city you want. I already showed this, but each individual building has a unique address. Each building also applies a landscape layer, as you noticed. So if we look at, the buildings here, they've applied a layer where they still looks like grass. They're just simply removing foliage. I'm gonna make the camera a little bit faster here. But if you go to the middle of the city, notice that these guys are applying the layer for asphalt. So in the case of the city center, you would probably paint manually asphalt just to cover all of this other stuff. Should be a lot more gray than that. That's some manual adjustment that you want to do. And if you go to rural, notice that the houses have this kind of dirt material here, layer. And all of these correspond to however you have your material set up. So this go by index. So if I select this house here and I go down to setup landscape, you'll see that we have a landscape layer index that will be applied. In this case, it is index 2. So if we go back to the material, what is index 2? 0, 1, 2. We're going to be applying the soil. So if you ever wanted different buildings to apply different layers, all you need to do is change the layer index here, and that corresponds to the layers here, and those layers will be applied. Again, this is more applicable if you have a really complex material, and keep in mind that you can do this at the class level. So if you edit all of the different, the base blueprint for this type of building, obviously you can do it there, or you can come to each individual home once they're spawned and change the layer here, and then reapply and align the landscape, and it'll reapply the layer there. All right, I already showed this. There's a global UI toggle for spawning interiors. By default is on. So if you go to buildings, you'll see the toggle right here. By default, you want all of the interiors to be spawned. But if for some reason you don't want them spawned, deselect it, and then the buildings will not have any interiors. So then what would you do if you want to spawn the interiors? Well, you can click on an individual building, and you can see that we have a button called Spawn Interior BP and Attach Interior BP. Notice that we have the interior right here, and it is attached, so it's a lot easier. You see it's like indented here. So if for some reason you didn't want things spawned, you can always come back here and say, I want to select all of the rural buildings here, and then you can come all the way down and say spawn interior and attach interior BP if you didn't have this option selected. So again, more options for the way that you want to do things. If you didn't want your houses to adjust the landscape because you wanted to see how the houses look first, deselect these options here. And then once the houses have been spawned, you can select the houses, whichever you want, and then go down here and select the actual option, align landscape and apply material, and that will basically do it. All right, and I think the last thing, and this is mostly for fun, this is something that I've added because now that we have water, why not, right? So if I wanted to create a little pier to come here at the beach, you can actually look at the blueprints that I've added. So you go to Blueprints, Props, Pier, and you have a few blueprints here that I've added. Again, this is mostly for fun, so I'm not going to spend too much time looking at this. But I just want to show you guys that it's here in case you want it. You can create a little pier. This is going to be a little pier that you're going to see. And if you go up and down, notice that the little legs are going to be changing. And you can have the same thing for a narrow pier. I'm going to move that all the way and make it a little bit taller. And move it a little bit here. Maybe that's a little too tall. Let's make it a little bit closer to the water. Maybe like this. And then we'll just kind of do it like this. And we can always duplicate it and make another pier around here. Why not? And finally, we have a ramp. Which we can then use to get to the pier. And I'm going to switch to the global. And let's just make this a little bit tall here. There you go. And we'll do the same thing. We'll put a ramp here. Move it a little bit high. And we have a ramp. Oops. Make it a little bit taller here. And duplicate it here and try to do the same thing. I know I'm taking a lot of time. This is just a bonus in case you guys wanted to see how I'm doing that. And this is super steep. So you probably want to make it less steep than that. All right, I think that's enough tinkering. And finally, I've also added a boat. So if you go to Vehicles, Blueprints, Vehicles, BP Boat, we have a little boat here. I'm going to turn this around. So if I wanted to do this, click on play. I haven't saved anything, so it's going to take a little bit longer to load up. Make this maximize so we have the little boat. If we jump on the boat and we press E, oops, we see that I've even added a little sitting animation, and then you can go ahead and ride your little boat. This is not physically based, by the way. This is just for fun. You can probably find way better assets out there that simulate a boat, but this is again just for fun. All right, that is pretty much it, guys. Again, this looks really ugly, but this is just a bug with the zone that'll be fixed by the time you watch this video. But hopefully You got everything you needed from this video. I covered a ton of stuff. There's a lot more little improvements here and there, but I'm not gonna cover it in this video. If you have any questions at all about using landscapes, spawning your city in landscapes, if you have any suggestions or comments, please feel free to leave them in the comment section below. If you haven't joined our Discord, I'm fairly active there. Go ahead and join. I'm gonna leave a link in the video description for Discord. Come talk to me, tell me what you think, and I hope you enjoy the update. I know it's been a long time coming. Thank you so much for your patience, but this was no small task to try to get things looking decent when you have so many buildings and so many different possibilities. So yeah, guys, thank you so much. Let me know what you think, and I'll talk to you in the next video.